Okay, so in the previous video we were working on creating basic components, and we also saw the props for this voter component, but now we want something to happen when we click on this button. So one thing you can do on React is that React is all about camel case. So usually in like in standard HTML, you will do something like on click, and then you can provide like what is the function that you will be doing for that. That's kind of like inline JavaScript, which actually is terrible if you're using vanilla JavaScript. But in React, it actually makes a lot of sense because we can do something like this. I can go and say first, notice the camel case. So basically this capital C means that whenever I click on, when I want a handler for the event click. So whenever I click on the button, I want this function to be called. And then, by the way, I do notice that my ESLint is not working. It should be warning me about that. So you can see that we have this error. So let's debug on what's happening. It seems like I didn't install all of the packages for that. So let me come in here. This is in the front end. So I'm going to make sure that I install everything and then restart the server. And probably restart the ESLint server in here. What I did in there was Command-Shift-P, which remember it's just the where is that command palette in here, and I'm just restarting the ESLint server in here, which gets rid of that. It's still not showing there for that one. That's interesting. I wonder why it's not doing that, but yeah, for the moment, let's go and say, there we go. I can see ESLint working now. So what I want to do with onVote is that I want to print in there voted for, and then you can see for who. And then you can see that if I click on that, there is voting for who is getting which one of my names is the most famous. And then I could show how many votes I have. And then like I can do something like increment the number of votes. So the thing in there is that I can do that, and then you can see that each one of those is going to have like independent number of votes. But the problem is that it's not being reflected in here. So everyone, please write this down. In React, if you want a component to redraw, if you want in React a component to redraw, I have this component, and then this is rendering the initial value. But this code is not executed again. So the way you will do that, like normally, will be something like this. You will go and say, but in React, the way that you get that to happen is that you change the state or the props. Now, let me show you how we will do that in the Ajax version of web development, which is what we were doing before. So you could go and put an ID in here, and then I could go and say, this is a number of votes or something like that. And then in this code, I could go and say number of votes span, Copilot is getting me exactly the value. And then I could go and increment the number of votes, as you see in there. And then I could just say in the span that I created, in the text content, which is going to be like exactly the content of this, actually. So speaking of that, for that to work, I will need to remove this, otherwise the number of votes is going to get removed. And I want that to be only for this one. Yes. So in that text content, basically, I want to show, yeah, that's good, Copilot. So I wanna show like the current number of votes, and then let's do this so it doesn't get twice. So if I do that and I click on that, now you see that this thing works. But then I have a huge problem, and is that if I do that for this one, it is actually going to fail, or actually is going to change the first one as well. Interesting enough, when I click on this, it keeps the count that we had in there. So if I go all the way to 10, if I start on this one, it will start again from 1, because it's keeping the variable, so it knows how many votes, but it's modifying the wrong one. So what React says is, I don't want you to be dealing with that. So instead of doing that, let's use this trick that you just tell me what is your state, and then I propagate that state as if the page was completely being refreshed. So you don't care. You don't have to care about what are the parts of the page that needs to be rewritten or redrawn or whatever. Instead, just leave that to me. And just as long as you keep your state immutable, that is very important as well, and you respect like all these other rules from React, then I'm going to handle the rendering. So the way we do that, it's that we can create in here like a state variable. And for creating a state variable, we're going to use something that is called a hook. So any of the hooks usually will start with the word use. If you want to see what are all the hooks that you can use, you can just see the documentation for that. So this probably works. So if I go to React and you look in here about the hooks that you can use, these are all the ones that you can use. This is the specific one we are using. So use state will have two parameters. You can go and say use state, and then you provide what is the default value. In this case is going to be 0. But you see, actually this thing returns two things. It returns the actual state variable, and the second one is what we call a state setter or something like that. Basically, it's a function that you can call for increasing the state or for changing the state. So what I can do is that instead of modifying the state directly, you shall not do that on React. So instead of modifying the state directly, what we are going to do in there is that we are going to say, I'm going to change the state to be the previous value plus 1, okay? And then by doing that, I am triggering React to say, hey, I want you to change that state, and because I'm changing the state, I am not really going to need to do this or that. Because since the state is going to change, and hopefully, oh yes, here it is. I do have here my render. I'm actually going to put this right below the rendering. So I'm going to have this render, and that is going to trigger this to be called again. So if I go back to this, and then I click on this one, then you can see it's render voted John, and it's a voted for John, and then what was the current value for that. And then if I call that again, this one is increasing, and then this one is increasing independently, and then we get. So as you can see, basically that is the whole idea on how you get a React component to re-render. Remember, you either change the state or the props. In this case, I'm just changing the state, and I want you also to notice that every time I change the state, the render function is executed again. So that is critical. So pretty much all of this function is going to get executed every time you change something. So you have to be very strategic on what you put in there. Now, what I'm going to do in the next video is that I'm going to show you what happens when you want to have, like for instance, a total number of votes on top, which actually we are going to implement in this index page. Because of that, then we are going to have to change who owns the data, which is very important in React.